when content creators kind of are lost for what to do, they want to just keep cranking out the videos. They just start repurposing content. So here comes your bedtime story. I'm going to talk to you about my public comments from 2022 on the proposed changes to the VA's mental health disorder rating schedule. I've been seeing it on YouTube a lot, and other people have started asking me about it. So here we go. All right, so you're going to see me reading from my phone. I'm reading the actual public comments that I made back in 2022 when the mental disorders rating schedule came out, and I'll kind of probably riff off of it too, maybe. But I'll start reading and we'll see where it goes. I agree that changes are needed. However, the proposed changes miss the mark. First, the proposals err in relying on the DSM-5, HUDAS 2.0, and CAPS 5 for inspiration related to assessing functional impairment. Maybe I'll do some videos on that talking about them, but for now, the DSM-5, HUDAS 2.0, and CAPS 5 are not examples of the state of the art when it comes to describing functional impairment. Their primary focus was not on functional impairment itself, and in particular, not assessing functional impairment in a forensic setting such as disability claims for VA purposes. A very high stakes situation where veterans need help and are relying on help, and it makes a big difference. The VA's proposed system is destined to be plagued with excessive subjectivity and inconsistencies between raters, i.e., one CMP examiner is going to say one thing, another CMP examiner could say another. And you know what? There aren't a lot of real specific information anchors, we might say, who say who's right and who's wrong, right? It's hard to really know because it's such a vague qualitative thing. It wasn't designed for this purpose. So I told you I lost my place already on my phone. So these tools were not developed for use in the setting of disability claims. While rating functional impairment related to mental health disorders is not easy, using a tool like HUDAS 2.0, for example, only launders the poorly supported subjective opinions of examiners into something that pretends to be relevant and useful. It is not. If the VA truly thought that the HUDAS 2.0 is an important and valuable measure, they'd be using it for all of the physical impairments as well, and proposing to use it for sleep apnea and their other proposed changes at this time. Yet the VA is not doing that because the HUDAS 2.0 is an overly subjective tool with limited utility in forensic settings. And the HUDAS 2.0 was designed for use by the World Health Organization for a whole bunch of different physical impairments, and not just psych impairments, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of things in there. You're just like, how is this relevant to my depression or anxiety or PTSD, right? The VA should go back to the drawing board and utilize a more streamlined set of functional domains with greater guidance for examiners, anchoring what different levels of impairment in those domains actually looks like. For inspiration, the VA could look to what the Social Security Administration uses for their functional domains, which admittedly aren't the best, but better than what the VA came up with, truthfully. While suggesting the use of a structured clinical interview for PTSD, which is the CAPS 5, is a noble goal, having accurate diagnoses related to PTSD has not really been the major issue for CMP examinations. This also could lead to having an additional separate measure of vague qualitative functional descriptions for PTSD with limited utility and actually describing restrictions and limitations, like what someone can and can't do. Given that contract CMP examiners are not well paid and the examiners contracting with third-party organizations like QTC, VES, and LHI, or whatever they're calling themselves these days, are often in a volume business where they try to complete as many disability exams as possible as quickly as possible, there may be an incentive for them to avoid doing the CAPS 5 by avoiding a PTSD diagnosis altogether. We've already seen evidence of times when examiners had an incentive to diagnose an unspecified trauma and stress-related disorder rather than a full PTSD diagnosis. For example, sometimes third-party contractors, like the companies, assign a mental disorders DBQ instead of an initial PTSD DBQ. If the examiner needed the PTSD DBQ, they'd have to wait on hold for a long period of time with the contract organization, or otherwise wait a considerable period of time in order to get the PTSD DBQ approved and assigned. I don't know what it's like lately, but that was years ago when I was a CMP examiner. It was a pain in the butt just to get a PTSD DBQ instead of a mental disorders DBQ, right? And yeah, I was on hold for 45 minutes. It's things like that. So the examiner would have to deal with not just deciding whether the examinee met the full criteria for PTSD, but also an introduced bias of burning the time involved with the bureaucracy of the third-party contractor over the fact that they needed the DBQ assigned to them to be changed. The CABS-5 takes a considerable amount of time to administer, and while certainly walking examiners extensively through the PTSD symptoms, it adds one more potential incentive for time-sensitive examiners to avoid making a PTSD diagnosis. Therefore, the VA should either require structured clinical interviews for all mental disorders, not just PTSD, or not require a structured interview. The VA should also consider streamlining the DBQs so that just one DBQ is used for all mental disorders, including PTSD. This could help reduce the impact of these perverse incentives for contract examinations to either diagnose or not diagnose PTSD, either by monetarily rewarding an examiner for a PTSD diagnosis, or through punishing one by requiring excessive administrative burden for the examiner to get the correct DBQ assigned to them. And truly, the CABS-5, whether it's the gold standard for assessment of PTSD, as like the National Center for PTSD, the VA would tell you, it also has a lot of really subjective qualitative descriptors inside. It's not a terrible thing. It's a great thing for trainees to use, but from my understanding, mostly it's trainees or research studies where you're seeing the CABS-5 being used, not so much any VA clinicians, or you don't usually see it. If you open up a VA treatment record and look at someone being treated for PTSD by someone who is an intern, probably not seeing the CABS-5 being used. No offense, just it's not a common one. Most importantly, the VA's proposal contains non-evidence-based and dangerous guidance that is not consistent with how other disputed claims are addressed outside the VA. One reason it is dangerous is that it opens the door to even more subjective and biased approach toward mental disorders. The proposals note, when evaluating intensity under the proposed criteria, examiners and VA adjudicators should be cognizant of the fact that some symptoms may overlap between domains. VA will provide training or additional guidance to help avoid the artificial inflation of the severity of a condition through the double counting of symptoms. However, this is me now. This is a misapplication of the avoidance of pyramiding in relation to the evaluation of the same disability under different diagnoses. However, different functional domains are not the same thing as different diagnoses. The guidance of avoiding double counting as it pertains to functional domains, simply wrong. Let me repeat that. The guidance of avoiding double counting symptoms of a diagnosis as it pertains to functional domains is simply wrong and reflects a bias and misunderstanding of mental disorders. For example, it would be unheard of to suggest that since a severe knee impairment was counted toward an inability to stand and walk, we wouldn't count functional impacts that impairment had in other areas, such as in relation to climbing, right? You have a knee problem, it impacts you in a lot of different ways physically, right? Not standing on ladders and not, I don't need to belabor that one, I guess. However, just as in physical impairments, one symptom or set of symptoms from one diagnosis can have a significant impact on multiple different abilities. For example, severe panic attacks in social settings can impact cognition through hampering concentration and problem solving, while also impacting interpersonal interactions as the person is having panic during social situations. They would also have trouble navigating environments since those environments were triggering panic attacks. In addition, adapting to stress is also often addressed in self-care, though this appears to be absent from the VA's guidance, which tends to read more like activities of daily living. I mean, there is some flexibility under cognition, but it's not the same. With the limited guidance the VA gave, this domain will likely be confounded with the task completion and life activities domain. Symptoms of a mental disorder can and often do have an impact on multiple functional domains. This does not lead to artificial inflation of the severity of a condition. It leads to accurately reflecting how a symptom of a condition can impact multiple domains of a person's life. The VA's proposal offers guidance with a misinterpretation of pyramiding, and this guidance should be eliminated, right? If the VA is worried about overlap between functional domains, then it should go back to the drawing board and propose more evidence-based functional domains in the first place. And that's the end of my statement that I made back in 2022 when these proposals came out. I'll probably try not to talk about it that much. I know everybody else is talking about them on the interwebs. But, if you ever have questions, I'm happy to talk about them. I also have one for sleep apnea. I'm trying to do videos now, apparently, if you can hear me or if my sounds, I'll try and make the sound better this time. But yeah, I'll read to you another bedtime story later for that one sometime. Thanks. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Thank you. Here's the part where I'm supposed to beg you to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and perhaps post a comment. But also, you can subscribe to my free email newsletter where I talk about my practice and my thoughts on things related to VA disability claims. You can subscribe to that on my website, nexusletters.com. And if a Nexus letter from a psychologist is something you or someone you know needs, you can get one from me at nexusletters.com. Thanks again.